This is what happens when tariff-driven food costs take 12 to 18 months to hit menus, and why 2026 could be the breaking point for food trucks and customers alike. Right now, most people haven't felt the full impact of the 2025 Liberation Day tariffs. Prices have gone up over the past couple of years, but according to industry analysts, what we've seen so far is only part of the story. The real wave hasn't hit yet, and the reason is simple: timing. Analysts say there's typically a 12 to 18-month lag between when tariffs are introduced and when their effects fully show up in food prices. As one analyst put it, it's not that there was no impact from tariffs, it's that they haven't had time to flow through the system yet. That timeline matters, because if tariffs were introduced in 2025, that lag puts the bulk of the impact squarely between April and October of 2026. In other words, the period we're entering right now is when those costs begin to surface in a visible, unavoidable way, and that sets up the central issue. Food prices may not have peaked yet, they may not even be close. To understand why, you have to look at how food pricing actually works. Costs don't instantly jump from policy to plate. They move slowly through supply chains. Producers absorb some costs at first. Distributors adjust contracts over time. Retailers and operators try to hold prices as long as they can. But eventually, those costs reach the end of the chain. And when they do, they hit menus. The uncertainty around how much prices will rise only adds to the pressure. The USDA's midpoint forecast predicts grocery prices will increase by 1.7% in 2026. On the surface, that doesn't sound dramatic, but the range tells a very different story. The forecast spans from a decrease of 2.3% all the way up to an increase of 6.0%. That's a wide band, and it reflects how many variables are still in play: energy costs, new tariffs, severe weather. All of these factors can push prices in different directions, and right now, no one can say exactly where things will land. What we do know is which categories are most exposed. Fruits, vegetables, meat, cheese, chocolate, spices, and seafood have all been flagged as being at risk from potential new tariffs involving Canada and the European Union. That list matters because it covers a huge portion of what food trucks rely on. These aren't niche ingredients, these are core menu components, so when those costs start to move, operators don't have many places to hide. This is where the situation becomes especially critical for food trucks. Unlike large restaurant chains, food trucks typically operate on very thin margins, in some cases around 5%. That margin doesn't leave much room for error. It doesn't leave much room for absorbing sudden increases in ingredient costs, and it definitely doesn't leave room for prolonged cost pressure during peak season, because timing matters here too. If those tariff-driven price increases start hitting between April and October, that overlaps directly with the busiest months for many food trucks, the period when they generate the most revenue, the period when they rely on consistent pricing to maintain customer flow. A modest increase in ingredient costs during that window can be more than just an inconvenience. It can disrupt the entire operating model. At that point, operators are forced into a set of difficult choices. They can raise prices and risk losing customers. They can keep prices the same and absorb the costs, which cuts into already thin margins. Or they can try to adjust portions or ingredients, which can impact quality and consistency. None of those options are ideal, and none of them solve the underlying issue, which is that the cost pressure is coming from outside the business. And this is where the consumer side of the equation comes into play. Over the past 2 years, menu prices have already been creeping up, not all at once, but gradually. Small increases that most people have noticed, even if they've adjusted to them. But if the tariff lag plays out the way analysts expect, those gradual increases could turn into something more noticeable by the summer of 2026. Because at that point, operators are no longer adjusting to past cost changes. They're reacting to a new wave of increases that are hitting all at once, and when that happens, the changes tend to be more visible. It's not a slow drift, it's a step up. For customers, that could mean paying more for the same items they've been buying for years. For some, that's manageable. For others, it changes buying behavior. And that's where the broader impact starts to take shape. Because food trucks don't operate in isolation. They depend on volume, they depend on repeat customers, they depend on predictable demand. If prices rise and demand softens, even slightly, that creates a second layer of pressure. Now, it's not just about higher costs, it's about lower or less consistent revenue at the same time. And that combination is what makes this moment different from previous price increases. It's not just inflation, it's timing, uncertainty, and margin compression all happening together. The scale of the food truck industry adds another dimension to this. According to CNBC, food trucks in the United States are approaching a $3 billion business. It's a growing sector, but it's also one that faces increasing challenges when costs rise and margins tighten. Growth doesn't eliminate vulnerability. In some ways, it amplifies it. Because as the industry expands, more operators are exposed to the same underlying risks: ingredient costs, supply chain disruptions, policy changes like tariffs. And when those risks materialize across the board, they don't stay isolated. They affect pricing, competition, and survival rates across the entire sector. So what we're looking at right now is not just a potential price increase, it's a transition point, a period where delayed cost pressures finally show up. A period where uncertainty around pricing becomes more visible, and a period where operators and customers both feel the effects at the same time. The key detail in all of this is that nothing has fundamentally changed overnight. The tariffs were already introduced, the supply chains were already adjusting, the costs were already moving. What's changing now is visibility. The lag is ending, the costs are arriving, and the system is catching up. That's why analysts are focusing on this specific window in 2026. Not because something new is happening, but because something delayed is finally becoming real. And once those costs hit menus, they tend to stick. Prices can stabilize, they can fluctuate, but once they move up due to structural cost increases, they rarely return to previous levels in a meaningful way, which means the decisions made during this period matter. For operators, it's about how they manage pricing, costs, and customer expectations. For customers, it's about how they respond to those changes. And for the industry as a whole, it's about how resilient it is when multiple pressures converge at the same time. So when you hear that tariffs haven't fully impacted food prices yet, that's not a reassurance. It's a warning about timing, because the impact isn't missing, it's delayed. And if the 12 to 18-month lag holds, the period we're entering now is when that delay ends. Which brings everything back to the core premise. The tariff price wave hasn't hit menus yet, but it's coming. And when it does, it won't arrive gradually. It will show up in a compressed window during peak season in an industry that operates on some of the tightest margins in food service. That's what makes this moment different, to not the existence of higher costs, but when and how they finally appear.